Hi everyone. Okay, so the weather has just not been cooperating. I've been trying to spray paint some of the pieces to prep them. However, it's been a little breezy out and it's a little warm and muggy, so I did spray paint a couple of pieces. However, it's taking a while to dry and I'm not sure how they're going to turn out due to the weather. But I'm going to go ahead and start playing around with some of the other pieces here and see what we can do. I think we'll start with this heavy little handmade piece of pottery. Now I have my Waverly chalk white paint that I'm going to use, and I went to the Dollar Tree and they have these little bath sponges, like little sea sponge. So I picked up a couple of those, and it looks like a Pac-Man, but I cut a little piece out. I also got a couple of sponges, and then I picked up some tin foil because tinfoil is great when you're just going to use something to pour some paint on and you want to work from a surface and you don't necessarily have any particular item to put on. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a little bit of tinfoil. Now I like the texture that it's already currently got on this piece, and it does have some like little grooves that somebody, when they made this piece, went ahead and made. And I think I'm going to keep some of this coloring that's on here, but again, I don't know. We're just going to go ahead and play around with it. So now if you wanted to add texture, as you know, you could use a little bit of baking soda, which I did bring up. We're just gonna see how it looks, and then if I need to add some baking soda, I will go ahead and do so. So I'm just gonna take a little piece of the sponge and dip it in, and then I wanna kind of blot some of it off into the tin foil. And then I'm just going to kind of stamp. And we're using a dry sponge. You don't wanna wet it. So as I use one end that has the paint, I'll use the other end to just kind of distribute the paint. And as you can see, that's kind of how it's looking. So again, I don't know what I'm doing with this. We're just gonna go ahead and play around. If you do go in and on any of the websites like Restoration Hardware or Crate and Barrel, Pottery Barn, West Elm, you'll notice, as I've mentioned, shape and texture. Texture, it seems to be really big this year. So that's very easy to accomplish with so many different mediums that you could use to create that texture. But by using something like a sea sponge, if you see this up close, you would see that it doesn't just leave that brushed look or that finished look. It kind of gives out a little bit of texture as well. So continuing on with my Waverly chalk paint, I'm going to continue to just spread the paint all over, just stamping it lightly. You don't have to go very hard, but I still wanted to let some of the natural color kind of peek through because it gave it more interest, and it was just something that I felt looked better. So I will continue to go ahead and cover this entire little piece and speed this process along so that you can kind of see the end result here coming up next. I'm going to go ahead and get started on this next piece. Now, the way that it looks on its own, it looks great. However, I just want to give it a more rustic look, something that I've seen off of Restoration Hardware. So I'm going to darken it up just a little bit and possibly add a little texture. I have some baking soda inside these little glass jars I've saved from yogurt that I've eaten. I try to repurpose these things. So I'm going to use Waverly chalk ink. I still have a little bit of white left over in case I need to get some gray in there. And then I have a little paper plate, and then I made another little tinfoil bowl there so that I can just use different shades of paint and kind of work around with that. I'm still gonna go ahead and use the same sea sponge on this, and we're just gonna experiment with it and see what happens. Like I said, worst case scenario is we can just paint over this. I do also have a few terracotta colors that I can also use, but we're just gonna play with this and see what happens. So let's go ahead and get started. Now I've already cleaned this up. Stickers are removed. There is a small little chip right here, but I think that's gonna be okay because once we paint it, it's just gonna look like it's distressed. So for the most part, it's still intact. It doesn't affect the rim of this at all. So I'm still gonna go ahead and just get with it. Okay, so we'll take a little paint and I'm gonna pour some in here. I only need a little bit. And then I will take the rest of this, and just pour it in this dish. Because I think I'm gonna add a little texture to this one. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'm just gonna put, I think in this little dish here, I'm just gonna take a little bit of the baking soda, kind of mix that in. I always keep wooden skewers on hand in case that I need them for whatever the project may be. So I'm just gonna use that to kind of mix this up. And then I'm gonna take just a drab of white and just kind of give it a little bit more of a almost cement look to it. Since I already have black here, I might as well just lighten this one up a little bit. So it'll almost make it a little bit more charcoal, and I could keep adding white to it if I want to lighten it up even more. I'm gonna go ahead and start doing the same process as I did on the previous one, and just gonna start stamping this, and we will see what happens. So continuing with my sponge, I'm just stamping all over the place, and then I'm using the other side of the sponge that has no paint on it to kind of buff it out and work it into the actual pottery piece. So this is how it's looking so far. And then I'm gonna try a little bit of this gray and just kind of add it in too. So at this point, I'm going to continue using the chalk ink colored paint and the gray that I mixed, and I'm going to just go ahead and cover the entire vessel here to make sure that I get the coverage all over that, allowing still for some of the natural color underneath to pop through. So you can see I've just taken the edge of this and just kind of swiping it also to give a little look of distressment, like it's just more natural. And you just lightly want to go back and forth. And again, if you put too much on your sponge, just dab it and you'll get some of that knocked off. Because you don't need very much. Now I went ahead and pre-painted these. It was a bit of a struggle because for the last several days it's been quite windy here, and that is not your best environment, is spray painting in the wind, because the spray paint goes all over, it doesn't dry as well, and you have a chance of debris hitting the item that you want to spray paint. So this one I spray painted with the Bear paint. I'm not a huge fan of it. It does take quite some time to dry. So I went over it again with Rust-Oleum in charcoal. I just did a little brief coating because the other pieces I did in the Bear, they stayed tacky for quite some time. So I didn't really want to use it on this one. Now I probably should have sanded this piece ahead of time since it was already glazed, but I didn't because I don't plan on really handling this thing. Once it's on display, it's on display. So I didn't give great coverage on this because I wanted to try something different. So I did this one in a charcoal color and this one I did in a chalk white. So I'm going to set this one aside. I bought this from the Dollar Tree. It is lightweight spackling. I went back again to see if I could find a little bit more. Unfortunately, they didn't have any. But I'm gonna go ahead and use this. Now, usually you use this to fill cracks and holes in your wall or furniture, things like that. You typically drywall. But we're gonna go ahead and mix a little bit of the black or ink colored chalk paint in with this. And then I wanna try and see what happens if I put a coating of this on there. So let's give this a try and see what happens. Oh, it's quite stinky. So I have a couple of spatulas that I'm going to use. This one's kind of beat up, so I'm going to go ahead and use this one. And like I said, I have no idea what I'm doing with this, so we're just going to play around with it and see what happens. If I need to add more of this, I can. Some people like to just put the paint directly in this tub, but I wasn't sure if I was going to use it for the other item or not, so I wanted to try to preserve what I had. So we're just going to work it in on the plate. And as you can see, it's already starting to turn color, which is exactly what I wanted, because I wanted it to be a dark color, but I want the texture. All right, this looks pretty good. I've got it mixed up pretty well. So I'm nervous. So we're gonna go ahead and give this a try and see how it works out. I don't know if I should just slather it on with this or use a sponge. Maybe I should try a sponge first. So I'm gonna cut another piece off. All right, I think I'll use this little piece here. And now I'm just going to kind of cover it. As you can see, it's giving a little bit of a texture to it. So I'm really hoping that this works out. I'm kind of nervous, but we'll see how it goes. So if you get a glob of this, I'm just taking this sponge and kind of working it through. All right, to go a little bit faster in this video, what I'm doing is I'm just taking on that heavy layer and just putting it all over this vase and really just stamping it on. And then once I get a really good coat, I'll go ahead and do the handles next, and then I'll do inside the top part of the neck and down inside of that, because you want to make sure that you don't forget that as well. Again, you want to put a little paint on here, dab off the extra, and then we're just going to get started. And so as you can see, I'm just kind of going over, and since this is all taped off and it's black, it's okay if I get it on the tape. And then you'll take your dry part just to kind of remove some of that. And as you can see, that is how it's looking. So I think that looks really neat. And I'm going to go ahead and continue out this look. And I might just do this all along the bottom, and then I'll kind of scatter it throughout the vessel as well. All right, so I'm going to continue just layering all the different paint colors on there to get the look that I want. So I'll take a little bit of the gray and some white, and you just want to layer it on there. And then I will go on to the next phase of colors, and it's okay if you make a mistake. You can just simply go over it with a darker color, and you're literally just going to layer it till you get the effect that you want. And I'm just going to continue, and I have still sections of this sponge that are still dry, so I'll just go ahead and use that to kind of work that in there and pick up any extra paint to kind of mute it down. So now, once you're doing a project like this, like I said, it's really important to step back from your project to kind of look at it and see if there's any areas that you might want to add anything. Like I might want to add a little bit of white in here and just kind of make it look leached down. But then if I think the white is a little too harsh, I can take a little bit of the black and just go right over that, and that's muting it quite a bit. But it gives it a little bit more texture. So you can see I added a little bit of the white here, and then I took the black and just got a little bit on the sponge, and now if I'm just going right over that. All right, so I have tried to clean my hands up as best as possible, and I think I'm gonna make this get a more earthenware type look. So it's going to stay light, and we're going to try to give it a little bit of texture on the paint. I went ahead and spray painted it, like I said ahead of time, with the white chalk paint. It is completely dry. I did tape off the bottom of it as well. So we're going to just go ahead and give it more of an earthy look, something that's just a lighter shade rather than so dark. And then I wanted to show you a couple of the other things that I spray painted and how those turned out. One was this little, I don't know if you remember this in the beginning, but this whole thing was kind of that goldy metallic look. And I taped off the top part, and I'm going to show a picture that shows this as being kind of like a dupe for the same look. And I went ahead and gave this a coat of black chalkboard paint because this actually had a texture to it which made it look really cool. So I really only needed to just tape off the top of this and then just give this a couple of coats of paint. Now this item here, I don't know if it's a bean pot or what they called it. It is actually quite heavy. But I got rid of that brown and I gave it a good couple of coats of another chalkboard paint, and I used more of like a charcoal kind of color. And now it already had naturally like a little scar on here and a little bit of just odd texture to it with the way that they glazed this. So I'm going to just keep those imperfections on there. This was how the bottom looked like. I left it the way it was. I did not spray paint the bottom because I kind of liked the way that the bottom of this looked. I did give a nice little coat of the paint inside as well, but we're gonna do something fun with this. I think we're gonna age this one out and give it that Restoration Hardware type of vessel dupe. We will put this one aside, but I wanted to let you guys know I went ahead and gave it a paint, a nice little coat of paint, and that's how it turned out so far. So we'll come back to that. So I'm going to keep the paint that I already have in this little plate, and I'm gonna take some white chalk paint, pour that on there, and I'm going to mix it up with the baking soda to give it a little bit of a texture. All right, let's get started and see what happens. All right, to add some color to this vase, I wanted to get something that looked kind of mossy. So I took some green along with a dark brown, and I'm just using the brown to mute out that green because it was the only green that I had currently on hand to get the look that I want for this vase. And then I'm just gonna smudge it out with that dry piece here and work it in. So this is how it's kind of looking right now. And I want to make sure that I get some of that also onto the other side. So when you first put the color on, if you have more on the sponge, you really do want to make sure that you work at blending that out rather quickly, because if not, you will have some spots that might be a little darker, and that's okay. You can always go over it with another color, but you do want to smudge it out because you don't want anything that looks like it's purposeful. All right, so I'm going to continue to go ahead and layer all over this pot, putting all the different colors on there because I really want that weathered, aged look. So I'm going to be using a little bit of the rust. I'm going to use a little bit of the green, mossy color on there to get my look. And here is the finished look. Okay, so we are back, and now I'm going to work on this cute little pot, and I've decided to do the spackling yet again because I really did like the look, but this time I'm not going to do it as thick and textured as I did last time, and we're going to go ahead and color this one. Now I went to Walmart this morning and I picked up some chalk paint because they're kind of wiped out of chalk paint around my area right now, so I know the last several times I've gone to the store they're pretty wiped out on colors. And so I brought up a couple of plates, one that we can mix around with the colors. So I'll set that off to the side. And I don't want to put a very thick coating like I did last time. We definitely want to give this that aged, weathered look. All right, let's take a little bit of the Waverly chalk ink. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up my ink chalk paint into the spackling to get the color that I want. All right, so this looks pretty good. It's about the same color as the pot. This is going to give us the texture without it being a totally different color. I like the color of this pot a lot. I like the dark base to it. So we are going to go ahead and take a sponge. Let's see which one we want to use. This one will work. And I'm going to just try to get it kind of lightly on here and just... Now some people have used like paper towels and things like that, but you can really just kind of dab on here. You don't want to get this wet, so you want to again use a dry sponge and just kind of work it through and dab it. So I'm going to put a very thin layer, just dabbing it on to get the texture, but as I said before, I am not going to put on as thick of a layer as I did with my previous vessel. This one I'm just going to do little swipes, and then I take the sponge and then literally just like dab it to get that texture on there. You'd be surprised how little product I actually ended up using on this entire little pot. Again, after you've done the entire pot, you want to make sure that you do the handles last, and don't forget the inside of the neck because you want to get some of that look in there, or it's going to not give that full effect that you want. Because the opening is a little bit larger, you want to make sure that you get inside of that opening just a little bit. So we're gonna have to let this set, and I'm not exactly sure how long it's going to take, but we will come back to this. And then when we come back to it, once it's completely set, we'll go ahead and start playing around with the colors. Okay, so while this other piece is still setting up and drying, it seems like it's going to take a little bit of time for it to completely dry. We're gonna go ahead and start with this piece here. I had spray painted it with white chalk paint, and what I did is I just took a pencil, a little mechanical pencil, and did a fine line on here, and we're gonna give it that half dipped look that's featured on West Elm. So I spray painted the inside of it too. I didn't get a ton of spray paint in there, but it was just enough. And we're gonna go ahead and play with this. Now I think I'm going to do the bottom part as a texture, and I'm going to do it more of a earthier color. So we're gonna take a little bit of the Swan White chalk paint and maybe just a dab of some brown or something a little bit more earthy looking, and then we're gonna mix it up as well with the baking soda. So now we've got that mixed up, and I'm going to take my sponge. Now these have all been cleaned and they're dry, and I'm going to take what's left on this chopstick and just go ahead and wipe it. And we're gonna try to give this that half dipped look, but with texture. So the nice thing about using a pencil is if you do the line very faint, you can always erase over it. So the half dip that they had, you would technically want to dip the paint, but I didn't want to go through all my paint like that, and I wanted to be able to give this bottom part a texture. So I am just stamping this, and so it's going to give it that texture, but you can see the color contrast there, and I think it's very pretty. So taking my dry sponge, I'm going to continue following the line that I drew with the pencil and go all the way around. Now I did add almost 2 coats because there were some areas that I didn't put the paint as thick. This project only took a few minutes to complete, and I was really happy with how it turned out. Okay, so we're back. I let this dry a little bit. It's still a little damp in some areas, but I took the putty knife and I just very carefully kind of knocked off some of it. So we're gonna get some texture in there. It won't be as bumpy. It is a thin coat, but I just took it and kind of scraped it on here just to kind of knock it off. So I'm going to go ahead, since I was already using that previous color that I put on this one, and I'm going to go ahead and use that on this, and then we'll just play around with it and see what happens. So I'm taking my dry sponge. Now this paint has been sitting out for a little bit, so it's getting a little tacky, which is good, as I don't want a ton on here. So I want to make sure that I get the paint on the sponge and then just blot it off. So I'm just going to take it and just kind of wipe it on here. You really want to use a light hand when doing it and not be heavy-handed with it, so you don't want heavy paint marks on there. Your sponge is dry, so just literally take it and wipe the color on there very lightly. I went all the way around, and then in some areas on the top part of the neck or opening, I did put some paint on there as well and left some of it to be a little bit heavier. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed going to the thrift store and finding all those unique pieces and repurposing them to give them that same look that I've been finding online. Everything is about texture right now. And remember, you can take simple, inexpensive things to give it that texture. Those are the types of things that you really want to just play around with. You saw how easy it was just mixing the paint with those, and it really gave a great medium. And then adding your paint in whatever color. Remember, there's no right or wrong to this, and you can always fix something if you feel like it just doesn't give you that look that you're looking for. So I hope you enjoyed seeing some of those DIYs that I did, and it gave you inspiration to go out there and give that a try as well. Some of them are just as simple as a can of spray paint, like the white vase that is pictured. That was just a simple can of white spray paint, and I think it looked great. It had that same inspiration look that I saw like on West Elm and some of those websites. So I will keep those other items that I did get from the thrift store for a future project, but in the meantime, I really am so happy with the way that everything turned out. All right, I'll see you guys again soon. Thank you so much.